welcome and many thanks for staying on with us here in studio. Makesi, I'd like to begin with you and your reaction to the comments that Kenyans are giving this morning.
Well, I mean, Kenyans have every right to say that they would want lesser burdens in terms of taxation. But again, I'll be just the devil's advocate on this. Like I said, the people who rightfully should be complaining, and I side with them 100%, are those ones who are employees. Employees have nowhere to run. This government has been very clear. So long as you receive a salary, we will find you and will come for that tax. I think the people who should not be really out there complaining a lot are the people who are not within the salary bracket and who are running businesses, and the only excuse that most Kenyans give is that the cost of living is high, so I'm not going to pay my taxes. I do not want to be put in the tax bracket. I want to have all my money and keep it and not give Caesar what is due to him. This is where the problem emanates. And as Kenyans, I think this is an attitude that we need to completely change. If we can slowly come to the realization that the more people who are either engaged in gainful enterprise or gainful business and they find a way to pay their taxes, it will percolate throughout the economy and there will be a change. And government will say, look, for the small business people that they're paying taxes, we won't continuously come after them. There will be a broadened tax base, there will be more revenue. But Kenyans have found a way, especially the ones who are small businessmen or running small enterprises, mama mbogas, boda boda, they do not want to pay tax. Now, what the impact does is what we were talking about earlier, is that the government now looks at taxing things that they cannot escape from. This is the fuel. It starts taxing on the bread, and then the cost of living just goes up. So my thinking and my proposal when I look at this particular budget and how government needs to approach this is that it needs to make taxation something that is palatable to persons who are in the small business sector, so that they appreciate that by me paying taxes, I might actually be alleviating a lot of things for the country in general. If we were to mop up a lot more people into the tax bracket, if we say got 3 more million people who are paying tax rightfully, 30% on their gross income and things like that, the government will actually create a breathing space for a lot more people. Secondly, I want to touch on the pending bills. Yes, we must pay pending bills. And I'm appreciative of the government saying that moving away from cash accounting to accrued accounting, which makes sure that you're able to capture pending bills in every financial cycle. And the importance of this is for government to have that visibility and know that it has an obligation and creates a mechanism to actually pay off these things. We've been talking about creating a particular bond that can be utilized to pay 700 billion and push this money back into the economy so that people can do that. I think the president, if he was to become more aggressive on this, the verification is one stage and it's a very important one, but you can't sleep at verification for too long. At some point, you must do something about it. The cries that people are crying about in terms of the economy being tight and things being tight is because Kenyans who have worked years ago, have 700 billion that has not appeared in their bank accounts. Imagine if all that money was pushed directly into people's pockets. Right. It'll change things. So for me, I have this hard clamor and call that the pending bills must be sorted out as a matter of urgency. When we do that, we might spur something that we have not seen in quite a while, because then pesa mfukoni means people can actually start doing things that transform this particular economy. But the way to keep deferring and saying, I'm going to give you 10 billion alone, we need to trust Kenyans. Okay. Put money in Kenyans' hands, they will know what to do with it. Kibaki did it, do it again.
Anthony, then there seems to be a lot of contradiction from the government. Like, Dr. Kamau had stated before, one end, you want to, boost the green economy, and then the next year you have tax proposals that are hurting the green economy. The government has promised, and you had one comment there saying, what really has the government done to boost the business environment? Because Kenyans must pay more taxes according to the government, but for them to pay more taxes, they need more money in their pocket to pay those taxes. The government says it is bettering the economy. Has that reflected within the local business environment for the small, mama mboga and the general shop owner? And what does it mean then if we are not allocating, you have a zero budget allocated to pending bills. What does that say about the commitment of the Kenya Kwanza government to boost the business space for Kenyan business people?
Of course, 700 billion is quite some amount, and the president has been quite clear in his previous statement that there is a lot of intentionality in ensuring those are well covered. And if you look, you've mentioned about what the government is doing in terms of boosting the business sector. If you look at some of the areas that have experienced a lot of growth in our economy, more so it's the service industry, and the service industry, those are our business people, because that has contributed to around 64% of our GDP. Mm-hmm. So I'd say, and if you look at the implementation framework of the Kenya Kwanza government, it really addresses that through its 5 core pillars, and one of it is ensuring that we strengthen the MSMEs sector, which contributes to around 64% mm-hmm. of our GDP. So I'd say there's a lot of intentionality in supporting the business sector in the country, and that is more so quite evident through the bottom-up implementation framework and what the government is doing to support the MSME industry. Mm-hmm. Yes.
All right. Dr. Kamau, what are your thoughts on, because there was a raft of reforms, but outside of the issue of pending bills and state-owned corporation, there's this fiscal deficit. And there are those who would say the government has done very well to reduce the fiscal deficit within the last 2 years. It stood at about 700 and something billion shillings, and now we're talking 587 billion shillings. But there's been many concerns about how we are managing the fiscal deficit. You mentioned yourself that we're paying interest. We're not paying debt. We're paying interest. As an economist, are we headed in the right direction when it comes to balancing the budget with the current reforms that we've seen?
I would say not really, unless now we really focus on that issue of the wage bill. The wage bill, because the wage bill is taking so much from the budget. The Constitution says that we should not exceed that 5% of our revenue collection on wage bill alone. But right now what we are seeing is that even when we look at the budget that was passed yesterday, is that 1.2 trillion going to debt repayment, 1.6 recurrent expenditure, and only 700 billion going to the development expenditure. So, and recently we saw actually the housing levy, the amount that the bill that the law that was enacted last year, and it was every employee has been paying 1.5% of the basic pay, and your employer is matching the same amount of money. And we had been promised that the government will build 250,000 apartments. That has not been the case. And if the government actually were to implement its proposals, we would have seen an increase in employment. The people who are in the artisan sector, the people, the carpenters, the masons, the plumbers, we would have seen that kind of economy stimulation. But that is not the case. Actually, to make the matter worse, what the government did is actually it took 20 billion from the housing levy kit and invested in treasury bonds. And it's very interesting that the government is taking its own money, investing the government is borrowing from its own money. And that's why we get it wrong, because that's a very huge financial mismanagement. And the problem that I always have, Michelle, is when the government borrows treasury bills of maybe 200 billion and promises to pay at a rate of 16%, and within 3 months, you buy treasury bills even for 3 months, for 6 months. So within 3 months, it had borrowed 200 billion, and it is repaying at a rate of 16%. Where has the government invested this money to have actually earned a rate of return of 16%. The government is not concerned about the impact of this debt, because if it were, then it would try as much as possible to reduce on borrowing on a short-term basis and actually push to buy long-term basis. And that would really help in actually managing the loan on interest that we pay on a day-to-day basis. For instance, even the issue of the Eurobond, the maiden one, we borrowed for 10 years from 2014 to 2024. Actually, proper and prudent financial management would have advocated for that we borrow for even for a period of that years, so that we would not even have felt the pain that we felt this year when we were going back to the international markets and even borrowing at a higher rate compared to even smaller economies than us. Because Benin and Ivory Coast, they got their Eurobond at a rate of 8.5%, and us, when we went there, we got at 10.5%. So the government is like throwing the ball down the road, or the can down the road, because as long as within my regime I'm not the one to pay all these loans, I'm okay if I borrow now. The other regime will take care of those loans that we are borrowing.
All right, and so Bokesi, then, when you talk about the fiscal deficit, and as it is, the Kenya Kwanza government said it wanted to move away from borrowing, but already it continues to have facilities available from IMF and all these Bretton Woods institutions because there's been reduced tax revenue, even after the 2023 Finance Bill or Finance Act now. And experts have said the 2024 Finance Bill, which will be an act in a few days, might actually see KRA miss out on its targets by an even bigger margin as a result of, less spending power and many other impacts of this on this bill. And so when you take a look at the page 2 of the Standard, it says Ruto is now looking east to seal holes in the second budget. What do you make of the managing of this fiscal deficit? It's reduced by a huge chunk, by about 200 and something billion shillings. But what do you make of its management?
Look, I don't think any president, and let's be honest here, this is not about Ruto. From what we are coming from, it doesn't matter who was president, even Wajakoya, he would still be in the same hole we are in today. The fact of the matter is you needed to go back to the markets to look for money, because at the end of the day, where we are at, we don't have the kind of revenues. We have not expanded our GDP to the point whereby we can be able to repay our debts based on the revenues that we are collecting from our economy. So you still have to go back to markets. I appreciate that now we're looking east. We're looking at the Sukuk bonds, we're looking at the Panda and the Samurai bonds, that's Japan and China. Their rates are much, much lower than what you would expect from where we've been going. The Americans and the British are very quick to get mobilized for you money when you want it. So when you say I'm appearing for a Eurobond here, you'll get your 9% very quickly, because they want returns very quickly. But on this other side, they are comfortable to allow you more patience, more grace. And I'm not surprised that that's where the President Ruto is headed now, to look for a lot more money from the East. However, in as much as we are looking for this particular financing in terms of raising more debt, because it's inevitable that we'll still have to do it, we must, again, come back to what we've been talking about. Cut on the wage bill, ensure that there's less corruption, ensure that when you're doing your expenditure, you're cognizant of the fact that you have a very tight window in which to do the things that you're imagining you want to do. Some of this allocation to some of these offices doesn't make any sense. So it's these questions that we need to ask ourselves. We also need to be very serious, like I've said, in divestiture in some of these activities that do not make any sense for the government. With that money, we can be able to generate a lot more activity, because we'll have enough money to pay off some of these debts that are disturbing us. But I'm of the opinion right now that we need to carry out and invest more in sectors that are going to spur a lot of economic activities. There's a lot of PPPs that were anticipated around the irrigation sector, dams and things like that, that would have enhanced our food safety. Most of them are stuck. So as a government, they need to look at what are these things that are creating a bottleneck for the application of resources and finances that will spur the economy. Okay. If the Kenyan Kwanza government is very clear on that, I am sure with this money that we are tapping to ensure that we stay afloat, we can be able to ride this wave, because it's going to be turbulent. It doesn't matter who was president. Ruto has done a fine job until now. He still needs to do more, but they also need to manage Kenyan sentiments. I mean, if you look at social media, everybody is saying, fight the finance bill. Okay, fine. The things that are touching directly on Mwananchi, listen. But the things that we have to be tightening our belt, keep them.
To do, absolutely. I want us to begin winding up, because we must set straight a few taxation measures that were mentioned in that budget breakdown yesterday. But Anthony, there's concern then, because the plan is to balance the budget so that we are moving to a place where we can finance the budget through on-source revenue. But last year, KRA missed its target. Experts say it's likely on course to meet its revenue targets for the next financial year as well. Why has this been the case, and what's the plan to ensure that KRA meets and surpasses its revenue targets? Yeah,
well, first of all, we have to acknowledge that the fiscal deficit for this financial year is a bit lower compared to the previous, and that will necessitate borrowing. And if you look at our budget policy statement, one of the strategies that has been mentioned to try and address this is what my brother is saying, long-term borrowing, because through that we get loans at very lower interest rates. And we have to acknowledge the fact that even by virtue of our shilling strengthening by around 14% on the major currencies, that is the sterling pound, the British pound, the dollar, has necessitated a huge decline in terms of our external debt, and I'm talking about 1.2 trillion. So I think even through our finance bill, which is supposed to resource our expenditure, we are very quick to, castigate it and talk about the 16% and talk about the 2.5% motor vehicle tax. But we are not pointing out some of the strategies that are really working in the finance bill, and some of it is like what you've mentioned, how we are going to curb tax evasion. And we have seen this being addressed through the 3% withholding tax for anyone who does business with government, and 5% withholding tax for anyone who, any foreigner who does business with government. We have also seen an increase in tax in mortgages, and when you look at the housing sector here in Kenya, only 0.6% of people who I assume are employed in Kenya pay mortgages, and that ideally is supposed to, encourage people to adopt the housing
levy. And just because we must wind up very briefly, Treasury then is seeking to make the housing levy a deductible tax. What is the impact of that move?
Well, I think it's a positive move, and it is more sustainable compared to what was currently proposed. And the government is very intentional in addressing this housing issue. And we also have to look at the ripple effect that it will have on our economy, because for every dollar that is invested in the housing industry, we are set to receive 1.5 USD in return. So, and still we were talking about the service sector. We have also seen the type of opportunities that are being created in that sector, more than 100 jobs for our people out there. All right.
Yeah. Dr. Kamau, we must wind up. Some of the other taxation measures that had been imposed include a registration of VAT threshold being raised to 8 million shillings from 5 million shillings, and this was in recognition of inflation. What impact is this likely to have in Kenya's business environment?
A very positive impact, very positive, because VAT is one of the tax systems that is a pain to business people. So if the small medium enterprises are exempted from paying VAT, because actually what that means is that they will not be charging VAT on the services that they are selling or the products that they are selling, and equally they will not be required to file VAT. Currently the threshold is at 5 million, and it has been there for the last more than 10 years, 15 years, and the government, in recognition of the inflation effect, it now wants to push it to 8 million. I would also want to talk about the issue of the housing levy. It is a plus for the employee. Another plus for employee is the issue of SHIF, Social Health Insurance Fund. It is now becoming, through the budget that was read yesterday, it will now be tax deductible. Then there's the issue of the pension. Previously, the pension that is exempt from the amount of money that you contribute to your pension that is tax exempted was 20,000. Now it is being raised to 30,000. So again, that's a plus to the employee.
Right. We must wind up, gentlemen. Marcus, let me give you the final comment. Another taxation measure there was Kenya granting duty remission and import of assembly items on mobile phones, smartphones and laptops, and these parts will now be duty-free. Impact on the economy.
Oh, that enhances manufacturing and enhances the ability, especially for some of these very required goods within this particular industry. We're moving very quickly into a digital environment. We're moving quickly into mobility that is either e-mobility or mobility that enhances lower costs for mwananchi. So for me, this is a good plus, and it's very welcome. Let's actually enhance more of these recommendations, and with time, I think on the long and short of it, Kenya is really trying to make sure that they can capture as much investments here as possible. Let's encourage that. I'm fully for them. I'm fully for this budget. Let it work for Kenyans, so long as they don't steal this money.
All right, and as long as they implement it as they promised they would. Many thanks, gentlemen, for being part of this conversation. We've been speaking to Anthony Ngero, who is the head of communications research at the UDA party. Also with us is Stephen Mwakesi, who is a governance expert, and economist Dr. Alex Kamau. Gentlemen, many thanks for being with us today, and thank you to you for watching as well. The conversation now turns to the Finance Bill of 2024, which will be debated in Parliament next week to see how Kenyans will finance the budget of 2024-2025. It is a conversation that we'll keep keeping an eye on for you and updating you as it happens. My name is Michelle Ngelo Odhiambo. Many thanks for watching. Good morning.
In a world where time races by, there exists a love that transcends it all.
Genova, no matter what happens,